Thank you all so much for joining the Data Analytics Demystified webinar. As we begin, I have a few housekeeping notes. All lines have been muted for today's presentation. Audience members can ask questions through the Q&A box, so please make sure to type your questions into the Q&A box. We will pass those along to panel as the time allows for it. Staff members are going to be monitoring the chat box for anyone that has technical issues. Everyone who registered for today's webinar will receive an email within 24 hours containing a copy of today's slide deck, a resource and informational handout, and a link to the recording from today's webinar. At the conclusion of today's webinar, you will be asked to complete a short survey. We ask that you take just a couple minutes to complete the survey so that we can continually improve our program offerings. Today's webinar is eligible for 1.5 UPPCC contact hours. To receive your contact hour certificate. At the end of the hour, you must complete the after webinar survey. In the survey, there will be a question where you will input in your email address and a certificate will be sent to you within 24 hours. Our panel today features Jonathan Hollinger, NASPO Director of Business and Data Analytics, Shane Caudill, PMP, Director of E-Procurement, State of Virginia, Garrett Debate, the Assistant Director, Office of State Procurement, Louisiana, and Jonathan Gasson, System Analyst, Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Now, to get everyone started today in our webinar, I've got a quick poll. So I'm going to launch it real quick. All right, everybody. I want to know, where is your state's current data analytics program? Are you in the beginning? So are you conceptually planning it, maybe 3 years into the program? Are you intermediate? Are you 4 to 7 years into administering the program? Are you advanced? Have you been at this 8 or more years? Or are you guys not there yet, but you're interested and you're here to learn today? And none of the above. I'd like to know where everybody's at. All right, guys, looks like we got some good votes coming in. Keep them coming, keep them coming. It's looking like so far, I'm seeing that most of our audience today is kind of falling into the beginning. So you're in the conceptual planning phase to maybe 3 years into your program. We've got a couple that are intermediate, 4 to 7 years. All right, good poll, guys. We're going to end that out. Now, that is some really interesting results, guys. I'm pretty interested about that. But to kick off our panel today, we have Jonathan Hollinger, who will explain the basics of data analytics. And Jonathan, are you going to tell us what exactly we mean whenever we say that phrase?
Yes, thank you, Lori. We are going to try to come to a common definition, what I will refer to as a practitioner's definition of data analytics. So we do have a lot of ground to cover, so I'm just going to jump right into it. So our agenda, first, we're going to talk about defining what data analytics actually is. We're going to talk about the process of doing data analysis and data analytics. That's going to include some conversation about tools and key components, and also some examples in each of those steps in the process. And then we're going to hear from our panelists, and this is going to be really interesting, I think, particularly to you guys, to hear from your peers about how exactly they are implementing data analytics in their state procurement offices. And then finally, we'll quickly review some resources. We put together a quick document that we'll continue to add to over time that just has some links to tips and tricks and handy resources about some of the things we're going to talk about today. So what is data analytics? Well, most of us probably think whenever we get an image of something like this, right? It's charts and graphs and they, help us understand what's happening. And that is part of data analytics, but that's only one sort of piece of the puzzle. So, if we try and think about what do these words actually mean, the problem is that both of them are overly broad, right? We have all different types of data. There's qualitative, there's quantitative, it could be structured and unstructured. We have all different types of analysis, and this is just a small segment of what those could be. And then not to mention, more advanced analytics and sort of what are frankly buzzwords in a lot of ways, like machine learning and AI and data mining and big data. So like, what do we do with all of that? Well, it becomes very overwhelming to think about all these things. So let's just think about what is a practitioner's definition for somebody who is working in a procurement office or another office really anywhere in state government as to how are they going to use data analytics. Well, the first thing to note is that it is a process. It is not one thing. It is not making charts and graphs alone. It is a whole sequential process of steps. And the other key aspect of this is that it really needs to be aimed at informing decision making, right? It's not an academic exercise. It is the process of discovering those insights and relationships that inform that decision making. I would also say it's essentially a research process and should really be focused around research questions. So what are the things that people are asking you for reports or information on, or what are things that you're asking yourself so you can understand what's happening? Now, the last thing I would say about this is that it does not have to be complex to be valuable, right? If you do some of the most simple analysis you can do on really good, clean data sets is going to be the most powerful. There is definitely a place for advanced analytics, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But certainly don't think that you have to jump from zero all the way to machine learning and advanced analytics. There's a lot of ground to cover in between there. So what does this process look like? We talked about how important it is to understand that it is a process. Well, it's really, I've broken it down here into 5 steps, which is starting with data collection, then data processing, modeling that data, performing your analysis, and then lastly, visualization and presentation. Now, the interesting thing about this is there was a survey that was done of data scientists, and they said that they spent 80% of their time on the steps prior to analysis. So data collection and cleaning and modeling that data. So before we even get to the analysis, we spent 80% of our time just getting the data ready to do it. Also, interestingly, visualization and presentation is probably the most important to informing decision making. So you sort of have this disagreement in the amount of time it takes and what is potentially the most important to get your point across. So let's dive into each one of those steps. So data collection. Obviously, we cannot analyze the data if we did not collect it. So we have to make sure we do that first. A lot of the tools you're going to use here are going to be enterprise databases, things like your financial system, an e-procurement system if you have one. Maybe you have a separate vendor management system where you keep like vendor scorecard information. You may also be tracking your sort of customer satisfaction amongst both state agencies that you serve and also suppliers that participate in your contracts. And then of course, we all have spreadsheet data. There's no doubt about it. So it's going to come from a lot of places. The critical component here is validation and standardization. You can save yourself a lot of time in the next step of data cleaning by not allowing people to give you bad data. So your data integrity is critically important. And that can be as simple if you have the ability to sort of edit some of your systems. Don't give somebody a free text entry, make them pick something from a drop down. That sort of validation can be helpful. The other thing, and this is particularly important for spreadsheet data, is make sure you store your data as data, as machine readable data, not as human readable, like presentation style data. And I'm going to show an example of that in a moment. The other thing I would say is having that feedback loop from analysis to collection is critically important. You are going to realize you're not going to think of everything up front. You're going to get into analysis, wish you collected a data point that you didn't, and you need to have that feedback loop so the next time around you can make sure you're asking for those data points from whatever system it is that you're getting it from. So what's the difference between storing your data in human readable versus machine readable? This is actually the exact same data set. So you have 2 different ways of representing this. The one on the left is how we would probably like to see it as humans, because we can very easily see like quarterly amount per company. But the one on the right is really how you need to have it set up to do really any type of analysis on the data. And many tools are actually going to require it to be in this format in order to really ingest it and do something with it. So really thinking about the difference between what you as a person might like to see in a data set and what a machine might like to see to have the flexibility to perform a lot of different types of analysis. Now, I will say that most of your databases, like an enterprise database, will kind of take care of this for you, right? They're going to store that data in a data schema that will be similar to this on the right. But if you're creating spreadsheets or manual data, always keep this in mind. So the next step, data cleaning, of course, is a big piece of this puzzle. There's lots of tools you can use here. I know all of our panelists will probably touch on this a little bit. Certainly, there's a lot of business intelligence software out there. You know, some big names like Tableau or Microsoft Power BI or Click Studio or Domo are all in that business. They have data prep tools built into their software that can help you with this cleaning process. But there's a lot of open source tools as well. SQL has been around for the better part of half of a century at this point. It's a very old programming language. But it is purpose built to manipulate data. And so it's a tried and true standard that I like to use personally. And if you have anybody in your organization that has those skills, it's certainly something that can be employed here. Also, scripting languages like R. R is a programming language for statistics. So it has a massive amount of libraries that can help automate a lot of these tasks for you to really supercharge your data cleaning. And Python is another programming language that many things are built on that has similar applications in data science. Of course, you can always clean things manually in a spreadsheet or semi-manually in a spreadsheet, but it can get pretty tedious. So what are the different ways that we clean data, right? Well, number one way, we combine data sources. Multiple data sources, maybe not formatted the same. We may need to correct data types, make sure all of our dates are stored as dates. We may need to standardize values. So, we all know that if you give somebody the opportunity to type in the name of something, they'll find a way to type it in 200 different ways, right? And so we have to try and standardize those down to a common set. And then, of course, you're also looking for outliers or missing information, incorrect data. There's lots of ways to visualize your data to try and find those things. So what do these look like? Obviously, if you have a couple different, this is a simple example, you have a couple different sources, you may have a different column layout. You basically just want to create a destination set of columns that you can map that data to, and then map those different fields to that. That's pretty simple. This is an easy thing to do in Python or R or SQL. It can be pretty tedious in a spreadsheet. So this is where those higher power tools can really take a lot of time out of this process. Data types, converting, we can have dates stored in a whole bunch of different ways depending on the system they're coming from. Spreadsheets are particularly bad for this, of course. There's a lot of tools, virtually any programming language, most business intelligence tools are going to have some built-in functions to correct this for you. So even Excel can do this a little bit. So, replacing those values to make sure you're always storing your dates as dates, your numbers as numbers is really, really important. Now, text standardization. This is where it starts to get really interesting. So, let's say you get a list of all these different names of vendors, and they may have extraneous information in them that you would like to standardize together. One of the ways that I like to do this is to create sort of an alias table. So you start storing all of the different ways you're getting this bad data in, and you then give it a standardized name. So you don't lose the original data that comes in. And the benefit of this is in the future, if you ever get that same name again, all you have to do is look it up and you can get the standardized name. So really on an ongoing basis for every batch of data, you're just fixing the new versions of names you found and not constantly having to start from scratch and standardize every single one by hand. Now, there are sort of progressively higher level tools. So here's an example where I used a couple of fuzzy matching algorithms in a database. I actually purposefully spelled this name wrong. I left a letter out. And you can see that the top result in both algorithms still found the right name, even though it's not 100% match. So there are a variety of fuzzy matching tools out there to try and take out typos and spelling errors, things like that. I will say in the resources, we do have a link. There is the ability to do this in Excel. So if you are interested in doing fuzzy matching in Excel, if you don't have access to other tools, it is possible. Extending beyond that, and I'm just going to talk about this sort of conceptually, is using machine learning to do text classification. This is actually a really good use of machine learning. And essentially, at a conceptual level, the way it works is you train a model by feeding it data that you hand coded. So let's say you want to figure out, classify all of these purchasing entities that come in, whether they're a state, a local government, a K through 12, higher education, so on and so forth. You can go through and take a sample of that data and code it by hand and know that it's 100% correct. You then feed this machine learning model that trained data, that very clean, manually cleaned up data. It then can guess the type of those entities for anything you feed it based on that training data. The more training data you feed it, the better it gets, and the more data it has to operate on, the better it gets. There's a lot of examples. I included a couple open source machine learning libraries that are available in the resources of this as well. So if you want to dive into that, there are some resources there. So after we've cleaned up our data, then what do we do with it? Well, the best way to handle it is to build a data model that creates a flexible data set where you can pick different attributes out of all the different parts of your procurement data universe, if you will. So, there's a lot of different ways to do this. I've worked quite a bit in Tableau and Microsoft Power BI and a few other tools like that. They have the ability to do this right in that software, so you don't need really anything external. You can do this, of course, in databases. This is sort of the foundation of what a relational database is that it makes those connections between your different data sets. But I will note, I've included in the resources, they've actually ported over the modeling tool from Microsoft Power BI into Excel in more recent versions. You can do some data modeling there as well. And I've included a link to some instructions on how to get started there. So if you are going to be in Excel and doing most of your analysis, it doesn't sort of lock you out. You can still do that modeling within that tool as well. The idea here is really to merge your data sets together and create relationships. So if we think about sort of a simple version of the types of procurement data you may have, contracts and solicitations and purchasing entities and vendors, there's all of these different objects out there, if you will, and you could analyze each one by itself, but then you have to kind of create the data set for each one, make sure you pick all the right fields about vendors for the analysis you want to do. The best way to handle this instead is to build a larger data model that has all these connections in it. And then you can just pick on the fly the various attributes you need. So instead of having to go back and be like, I forgot to include whether they were a small business or a minority, women and veteran-owned business in my data set. So now I've got to go back and collate that field with all these vendors to see if I can do that analysis. This flexible model allows you to pick any attribute you have from any of this relational data model at any time. So that's really the benefit of data modeling rather than doing a sort of single data set at a time. So after we've modeled that data, then we're ready to finally get to the analysis, right? It took us a long time to get there, but there's a lot of tools for this. Certainly a lot of people are going to do analysis in spreadsheets. Lots of business intelligence software out there. R and Python, once again, great places to do this type of analysis, particularly if you are doing more advanced statistical analysis with regressions or trying to understand correlations and things like that. Now, the key components here, we talked about this being a research process. So, developing research questions, what are you trying to answer up front is really important. Selecting the type of analysis you want to do. We're going to talk about some of those major categories here in a moment. And then, executing that analysis, testing it out, seeing what you find, repeating, picking a different type of analysis. All of that is part of this sort of iterative process of analysis. So what are those research questions going to look like? Well, the biggest bucket is probably going to be how much spend did we have in some category. Now that category may be on a contract with a vendor, with a certain type of vendor, with a certain type of entity, or with a single entity. It's basically just slicing and dicing your data by these different dimensions of categories that you have. That's the biggest piece of what most procurement offices are doing, but it's not the only piece. Certainly, process metrics. How long did it take in between these different points in a process from an idea to when we released a solicitation, when it closed, when did we make an award. All of that is critically important to data analytics in the procurement space. Cost avoidance is always going to be top of mind for anyone. How can we quantify how much cost we avoided through competition or by following the processes and procedures in our state? There's lots of different ways to do this. You can use your own data to sort of look at the delta between the final price. You may have to use like a market basket or something like that, and the average price or the high bid. Or you can certainly also benchmark out to other comparable contract vehicles to the extent that you can find that data. Forecasting, always going to be a research question. How much spend are we going to have next year, in 5 years, on this contract, with this vendor? Particularly if you are collecting an administrative fee, this can be a critically important thing to be able to forecast over time in terms of your resources. But also, price drivers. Bringing in outside data into your process. Are there underlying macroeconomic conditions that are going to impact pricing? There's indexes out there. There's producer price index, consumer price index. You may also be looking at trade policy impacts. Things like tariffs can certainly have an impact on pricing. That can help you both predict what your pricing may be and think about timing, but it can also help you make decisions. If a vendor comes back to you and is looking for a price increase for a particular reason, having a data-driven basis to stand on is going to help out a lot. So what are those different types of analysis? Well, there's basically 4. You have descriptive, that's basically what's happening. You have causal, that's why it happened, or diagnostic. Predictive, that's basically forecasting, trying to figure out what things are going to happen in the future. And then prescriptive is the most advanced type, which is really where you're sort of evaluating alternatives and actions as to what should I do. So, where do some of the things we talked about fall? Most of what you're going to do is going to fall into descriptive. This is sort of like telling your story of what has happened. That is just using your own data to evaluate what has happened with the raw data you already have in the past. Diagnostic is sort of the next step, and that may be just simple as drilling down into sort of your line items. So let's say in your descriptive analytics, you determined that you had a big spike on a particular contractor with a vendor. You may drill down into those line items to see why. Did it go to a particular type of entity? Was it a big order? Was there some change in the market and the demand for items? There's lots of different ways you can drill down into that from a diagnostic perspective. Price driver analysis that we just talked about, certainly part of that, understanding the why of why pricing is changing. Forecasting, your spend, potentially your revenue. It also helps you predict future resource needs. So if you see huge demand growing in the usage of your contracts, you may need to be looking at additional resources, whether they're people or technology or something else that can help you predict that. Prescriptive is more advanced, like I said. This may be where you test the effects of a specific action. Modeling return on investment is one that comes to mind here, sort of thinking about if you have thinking about doing maybe a statewide contract, is it worth doing, given the return on investment we might get and the usage and the amount it's going to cost to administer it. Building a model to sort of evaluate that and give you different alternatives to how you can do that is definitely a use there. So after you've done that analysis, now you're really ready to visualize and present it. So lots of tools here. Once again, spreadsheets, scripting languages, business intelligence software, all sorts of different ways to create data visualizations. Key components are to think about your audience, make sure you're selecting the right visual to tell the story you are telling. Make sure you curate your data. You don't want to just throw everything in there. It's not necessarily going to tell the story you want it to tell. And the last thing I would say is just pay attention to the details. This is kind of the intersection of data and graphic design in some ways. So you really have to pay attention to things like colors and formatting and all of that in this process. So, selecting the right visual, I'll tell you bluntly that pie charts are usually not the right one. But one of the reasons why is that it's very difficult for your brain to sort of understand the difference between those pieces of the pie. But you can see this is the same data. The one on the left really tells a better story that category 3 is twice as large as category 1, whereas your eye doesn't pick that up quite as much if you're looking at the visual on the right. So, think about the story you're trying to tell. The other thing I would say is, curate your data. So for example, on the left, you could include every little tiny slice down to the smallest piece, but is that really the story you want to tell? Or do you want to sort of group those together because you're trying to highlight the fact that categories 1 through 4 are more than 50% of the total piece of the puzzle? Also, you can combine those together. This is the same data set, a tree map on the left, which is a less common graphic, but something that can be created in virtually any tool. In a lot of ways gives you a lot better ability to visualize more slices. So you can see, the sort of intersection of those two things. And then the last thing I will close on is your visual details. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I could give you is, if you're going to represent something in one color across various charts, pick the same color. So you can see here, we're representing both state and non-state participating addendum. And, non-state is always red and state is always blue on every visual. So that way it doesn't become confusing. Visually, everybody, the users of this can, quickly see on this dashboard what is what. And the more they use it, the more that becomes ingrained. So, pay attention to those visual details of formatting and all of those sorts of things. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Shane from Virginia, who's going to walk through, how they make decisions and tell stories with their data.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. Really appreciate it. I'm happy to be with everybody this afternoon. My name is Shane Caudill, and I'm the director of the e-procurement bureau here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, otherwise known as EVA. That's how we've branded ourselves. E-procurement system that's been in place here in Virginia since March of 2001. So old and been around for a while. And we create a lot of data. So I always laugh when we talk to people about our data is we're real good at creating big data. And we're trying to get better and better and better at analytics and telling a story with that data. So Jonathan, if you could, next slide, please. Oh, there you go. So what do our analytics mean to us in the Commonwealth of Virginia? And I think this ties in very nicely with some of the concepts and thoughts that Jonathan had put forward to get us kicked off today. And it's the backbone for us, for our story. And I kind of titled my section Decision Making and Storytelling. We found that we had to not only do analysis to help us make decisions or to find or identify savings, but we had to tell the story of e-procurement, and not just e-procurement, but the benefit of procurement. I hope most of you on this webinar today have a big belief in the procurement process, the competitive process, and hopefully in e-procurement initiatives, or at least thinking that there are positive outcomes to e-procurement initiatives. But it goes beyond narrative for us, especially a program as mature as we are. Again, going back to March of 2001, we had to get better at our analytics. We had to start using our data to tell that story. Again, not only of e-procurement, but of the procurement process in and of itself. And that's a lot of things, from cycle times to metrics, to forecasting, to cost avoidance or savings analysis, depending on how you look at that. We also needed to start using our data to inform our decisions. And I'll have a couple examples I'll talk about that. And then the last one there is our commitment to transparency. It's not just that our entities and vendor community creates all this data for us and we hide it. We keep it hidden away. We try our very best with our program to make everything public. We publish hundreds upon hundreds of public reports. We have charts. We make and share our data with other entities, with audit groups, with the federal government and other organizations so that they can look at our data. And I'll talk about that a little bit as well. Next slide, please. What's in our toolbox? I think these are some things that Jonathan touched on. So it's just reinforcing kind of what we're doing in Virginia. Our big one up there is our data warehouse. It is a database where we're storing this data, and it's not part of the application, right? It's storing that record for us to allow us to do that analytics and pulling data in from multiple pieces across our e-procurement platform, vendor, solicitation, PO, receipt, all kind of consolidating and coming into this data warehouse where we're doing our analytics. And that data warehouse has our history back to the beginning of the program. So, we're looking at almost 20 years worth of data that we can work with. The next thing, statistical software in this case, and we use R. R is the software we use. Now, I'll be quite honest with you. We use R because of the last bullet point I'll talk about, the analyst we brought into our program who brought that skill set with her. And I'll talk about her in a minute. But R, it has that ability, as Jonathan mentioned, to go through, cleanse, analyze, and even do visualizations on very large data sets. It's open source. So if you have budget limitations and you can identify that skill, you can bring that in. And as Jonathan mentioned, thousands of packages to do statistics, data cleansing and manipulation, graphing, charts and dashboards on the visualization side, and then the ability to document that. So it's reproducible, it's auditable, and it's consistent. It's consistent. That's a great thing. But again, we were lucky. I don't know anything about R. We hired to that skill set, and that's one of the things that we did. Our business intelligence tool, where we accomplish a lot of our transparency, is a tool called Logi. It's just a business intelligence tool. It's just one we settled on several years ago. There's lots in the market, but we do our internal reporting. There's an ad hoc reporting tool there where we have some database structures built for some of our end users, and they can do their own ad hoc querying. And again, that ability to do public facing charts and reports as well that we publish on our website and, allow for analysis either by the vendor community or the general public at large to look in our procurement data. And then overall, R and Logi, helping us with that visualization software. We've also dabbled with some of the other tools Jonathan mentioned, Tableau, Power BI, R, of course, and then certainly Excel. We use Excel as well, depending on what we're looking at. And I think Jonathan made a really great point. It doesn't always have to be complex. Sometimes it's something simple we're looking at, and picking the right tool. And the right data set and to get the answer that you're looking for. The other tool in our toolbox, the other great thing we have is we hired to this position. We hired a strategic data analyst. There is a program, we'll talk about them a little bit, at Virginia Commonwealth University that is a decision analytics master's program. We identified that within the city of Richmond. That's where VCU is located. We got kind of tied into that program several years ago, and we've been able, those group of individuals coming out of that educational program over probably the last 5 to 7 years have delivered this type of skill set for us to help us do data analytics, cleanse our data, bring skill sets to us with R and some of these, Tableau and other business intelligence tools. So we've been really lucky to have that type of program in our city and in our state that we've literally, everybody that's been a strategic data analyst on our team has come from that program at VCU. So we've been very lucky to tap into that. So that's one thing to think about with your own state is there an organization, a university where you can tap into that skill set to bring that type of skill into your organization. So next slide, if you would, please, Jonathan. Now, this is a tee-up slide for me. Our strategic data analyst, her name is Anna Coy. She's actually she is listening as a participant today on this, on the webinar that we're doing. And she put a video together for us, it's a couple minutes about R and R Studio. So Jonathan, if you'd hit the next slide, we'll give that a second to tee up. I think it just takes a minute There it is. It's ready to go. And I'll let you enjoy this video.
Using an open source statistical software like R is not only free of cost, but it also allows you to utilize thousands of packages targeted to extend the capabilities of the software. This is because R has a very extensive and active developer community. You can import your data and view the rows and columns in your data set. You can also explore and describe your data using existing functions. You can clean and manipulate your data by summarizing it into new tables, much like pivot tables in Excel, or you can create new calculated columns in your data set. You can export your modified data sets to be used in other applications later, or you can generate visualizations to be used in presentations or in reports. Some packages in R allow you to export your programming code so that you can develop and generate clean and reproducible reports. These can include the tables that you've generated or your visualizations. These reports can be in the form of an interactive HTML document, which can even display tooltips on your visualizations that can help you further describe your data. Alternatively, you can also export your report in the form of a PDF for an easily shareable or printable version. It can also be used to design interactive dashboards. Here's an example of an interactive dashboard designed using R software to display the results of our fiscal year 2020 analysis. This format was chosen because it allows for multiple tabs to include various analyses and data sets that we review annually. It highlights key performance indicators in value boxes at the top of the report. And it allows for the organization of information using tabs. Much more information can be included here than in a static printable report. It can display data in tabular format like you see here, or you can include visualizations to communicate ideas. Tooltips can be added to the visualizations to highlight data points and also keep our graphs clean and easy to read. It also allows us to display our data sets in a sortable and searchable format. R is a powerful tool that we have been using for many of our data analysis needs.
Great. Thank you, Jonathan. And then thank you, our next slide there. And again, that video was put together by Anna Coy, who is our strategic data analyst. And I was explaining to the group before we got started that Anna and what we were looking for kind of bridges the gap for us from our information technology group, which also supports EVA and does a lot of querying and reporting for us. She has a good understanding of the e-procurement tools and the procurement process, and brings the skill set in particular. As you can see, R was one of the skill sets she brought to us. The big thing I'll point out about R again, that, you know, from the seat I sit in, certainly we invested as a program on the strategic data analyst position, you know, to bring that skill set in as an employee. But what I like about R is that it is open source. So that, you know, that's helpful depending on your budget situation and the things you can do. So continuing on through some examples and just kind of talking about EVA and what's going on in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the data cleansing and the challenges, I think these are going to sound very similar. You know, our data, we got our PO data, our solicitation data spread across multiple applications, our contract data, and then one that kind of slips in there for us there at the bottom, our customer care data. We do maintain, they're on my team, a customer care group, kind of a technical customer care group that helps with issues in the EVA e-procurement system in and of itself. But our ability to look at that data and find trends and areas that maybe we need to enhance training, or we've got an entity that's really struggling with something, or identifying a persistent issue that we can address. So it goes beyond even us doing analysis on our procurement data. We do a lot of work around our customer care data as well. But again, same challenges that we deal with, the cleansing piece. The one that might be interesting and a little bit of a differentiator that hadn't been talked about yet is that top bullet there under cleansing. We're a redactor tool. So because we're very big on transparency, we're showing a lot of PO data and solicitation data through public reporting channels. Well, one of the things you got to worry about is personally identifiable information, right? And not wanting that to become visible on a public report, a social security number, a medical identification number, credit card number, things like that. We actually have a tool that goes through and I'm really simplifying it here, but it sniffs for number combinations that it thinks could be, like the way a social security number is laid out, and it can redact them and X those types of data out to protect personally identifiable information. And the cool thing about the redaction tool, if we find it makes a mistake, it finds a number combination that's really legitimate, we can go back into the tool and actually unredact that so that it will become publicly available. So that's one of the differentiators for us. But I don't think anybody here is seeing any difference. The challenges, people, data in multiple applications that we're trying to pull together, and when you have to standardize on things. What's the big one? It's probably if you're counting bullets, that fifth bullet. Well, our users are using the e-procurement system. And as much as you try to standardize what your users are doing, they still key in some stuff, don't they? And enter some interesting combinations when they're making their purchases. So being able to clean that up, or, sometimes throw it out if you have to throw it out, or, as Jonathan was talking about before, trying to do some sort of cleansing, to get to what was really entered so that you can do the type of analysis or comparisons you need to do. And Jonathan, if you could take me to the next slide, please, sir. How do we strive for continuous improvement? What are some of the things that we are doing in the Commonwealth? That annual fiscal year analysis, Anna showed you that dashboard she built for us. We post that publicly. We share that with our upper management teams. It's a lot of benchmarking. We have incorporated some things from that. That takes me to the ad hoc analysis. Like if we get challenged for something or need to do something that's, a quick solution to formulate insights or things we do on an as needed basis. One of the examples of this is cycle time. We'd always kind of dabbled in cycle time and we knew we could do it. We got challenged on that about, hey, we really need to look into how long it's taking for solicitations to finish. We feel like it's taking too long. We were able to do a very detailed cycle time analysis across multiple procurement categories. We did it originally just ad hoc because we got asked to do it. And then we rolled that into our annual analysis so that it's coming out on a fiscal year basis. That next one I just talked about, we're evaluating our customer care data and, looking for areas where we can be better, where we can make the system better. One of, again, a simple example of that, we handled way too many calls from our buying and vendor community on password reset issues. So we worked, this goes back several years ago, we worked very hard to simplify how you do a password reset, how you retrieve a username you've forgotten, because that was a bulk of our calls. So we weren't really helping people with procurement, we were helping people with passwords. So we simplified that process functionally and drove our tickets down tremendously. And again, we noticed that through our data. And then the VCU program sponsorship, there's the Master of Decision Analytics. That's that program we've been drawing from. We work with that program. We send them our data. The students do different like projects across the semester, and they give us ideas on things to do. So we get the benefit of having an outside organization maybe bring us ideas or things in our data that we never thought about before. And the students work with real live procurement data where it's not a fake data set. So a lot of areas where we're, have used our data and our data analysis to strive for that continuous improvement. Next slide, please, Jonathan. What are the benefits? I'm hoping you're hearing this as I go through here, but helping us identify areas where we need training, looking at utilization and effectiveness of our tools, identifying peak activity times where if we have to do migrations or updates where we have to bring the system down. Simple things like that, like when do we have the most users in, and throughout the year, not just in a day, weeks, and throughout the year, when we could, if we have to do major migrations or updates to bring the system down. That next one, streamlining account executive assignments, that all gets into identifying areas of need where we have a weak spot, where folks are maybe struggling with a certain area, identifying best practices, trying to move to being more proactive rather than reactive to situations. And, we're doing that with forecasting and trending and all those things. Certainly monitoring compliance, and then the classic year-over-year metrics to look for those trends. Again, some benefits there. Jonathan, next slide, please, sir. Just a couple quick examples here and wrap up. I'm looking at just a few more minutes, I think, left in my time. We did, I'll define quick quote for you. That's an informal small dollar procurement, which in Virginia is $100,000 and below, where we're needing to do competition. So it's an unsealed informal procurement for us at a small dollar level. We use a tool in the Commonwealth that we've, has a brand name of Quick Quote. We did a cost avoidance or savings analysis on that tool. That's one of the ways we've done data analytics. This year in fiscal year 2020, 8.1 million in savings from the use of the tool, 50.8 million in total awards doing that type of procurement in the Quick Quote module. And every time one of our end users issues a Quick Quote, 13.8% in average savings. And then within our, we have a disadvantaged business program. We call it SWAM, Small Women and Minority Owned, showing, where the savings to those type of vendors happen. And then Jonathan, next slide, please. Again, staying in the Quick Quote analysis that we do, because we have a data warehouse that goes back years, and because we have a consistent process, we're able to run that analysis going back. In this case, I'm showing you 5-year example. So you're kind of showing the value proposition, year over year of not only that type of procurement method, but of the e-procurement tool that allows you to do the solicitation in an electronic environment and grab those electronic bids. So that concept of total amount saved, what the overall percentage of savings is every time we issue a Quick Quote, and then total amount awarded. So just again, telling that positive story of the procurement process, of e-procurement tools and how they impact the Commonwealth. And Jonathan, next slide, please, sir. Solicitation cycle time analysis is something else we've done. I mentioned that before as well. And, identifying areas for improvement, where from 2019 to 2020, we actually got more efficient, showing that, hey, most of our solicitations, and this is at all dollar levels, within the Commonwealth, are being completed, and this is issuance to award, in 6 months or less. And showing, hey, when somebody says, oh, that procurement takes too long, or my goodness, procurement is such a time consuming. We go, well, really, for these complex procurements and across the board, when we compete business, pretty efficient. This includes construction and everything in there. And then Jonathan, moving to my last slide there, that's a look at the cycle time analysis across procurement categories. And you got to kind of turn your head and read them there. But construction and equipment, and as we've broken up different procurement categories and how long each one takes. And I always think it's interesting how long it takes to do technology procurement versus even construction. That we can build a building sometimes quicker than we can procure technology, which I always find interesting. But again, really appreciate your time today, and I'm very happy to be invited to this. And I would like to turn it over to Garrett.
All right, thank you, Shane. My name is Garrett Debate. I'm an assistant director in the Louisiana Office of State Procurement, head of our data analytics team. Today, I'm going to show you a little bit about the things we do to help support our office. We may not be as advanced as Shane in Virginia, but we're getting there. We just recently started work in Tableau and a little bit of dabbling in Tableau Prep. So what I'm going to go over today is where we get our data, what do we do with our data, and how does that data help us with decision making? Okay, next slide, Jonathan. Okay, so where do we get our data? Our main source, like Shane, is our ERP system, which is SAP. We have a large data warehouse in there that goes back several years. We can pull our e-procurement reports based on purchase orders and contracts. We have our financial reports that we use based on accounting codes, and workflow reports. This is where we can pull status and cycle time information. We also use our credit card spend reports a lot. These are very helpful in tracking that tail spend that we have. Next is Proact. This is going to be an internal system for us we use for workflow and document tracking. This might be for some entities that we do work for, but they do not use our ERP system. So it's another set of data that we might have to compile. Next, we do look at our vendor submitted usage reports, and we have internal and mostly manual tracking spreadsheets. A lot of the stuff that we do here in Louisiana is done in Excel. Like I said, we just started pulling some of that information into Tableau to make it a little easier on us. All right, next slide, Jonathan. Okay, so data cleaning. We have to do a lot of this here because we're not using R or some other program like that that can help us out. And that's why we're getting into Tableau Prep now to really help us get a handle on that. So this is where most of the time is spent during data analysis. What does it involve for us? So it's removing irrelevant values, looking for typos, check your formatting, a lot of what Jonathan and Shane have already said. But one of the main things that I liked that Jonathan said are grouping fields. So Jonathan mentioned standardizing names. One big problem that we have with our credit card data is the vendor names. So when we get that information pulled out, Walmart, for example, might have Walmart number 1, Walmart number 300 and something. We're not really interested in what store number they are. We just want to condense those all into one field. So I think that's a good example of what Jonathan was talking about with standardizing the names. Another thing we look to see is if we're relying on manually entered fields. Do we need to categorize some responses if they're entering things in descriptions? Are your dollar and date fields entered correctly? Check your formatting on those. Make sure that commas are supposed to be commas or decimals are supposed to be decimals, things like that. And just remember that poor data can lead to poor decisions. All right, so what do we do with our data? We do some procurement tracking. There's been a big focus in our office lately on status and cycle time. So we'll have some information on that in the next few slides. We do spend research where we compare current pricing with proposed pricing. We look to see if a contract is still needed if we don't have any spend on it. A lot of that might be emergency contingency contracts. And these are ones that we hope that there's no spend on them, but we need to keep them in place. This year for us, probably all of our emergency contingency contracts have been used between COVID and being hit by 5 tropical systems. Another thing we look to see is if agencies are spending a lot of money on items that aren't on contract. We'll dig into those things and see if we need to add them to a contract or maybe do a new bid. Next, we prepare reports for our legislature and the public. Those can all be found on the Louisiana checkbook, and there's a link there for reference if you're interested in checking that out. All right. So here's an example of one of our dashboards that we created using Tableau. This was created by Christy Beauvalent in our office. She's been a great asset for us, kind of like Anna and Virginia. So here she created a dashboard that's going to tell us the number of RFPs we have for different agencies, departments, and what stage of the process they're in. So if I look in this first group, where CPRA, this is Coastal Protection and Restoration, I could see that they have 4 RFPs. They have 1 in the review and approval status. They have 2 that have been published, and they have 1 that is in contract negotiations. Okay, get to the next. If I click on this green tab, it'll bring me to the next slide, which will show the story of the RFP that's in that status. So here, if you click on one of those bars in the previous slide, it would bring you to the story, which shows the agency. It'll show you the stage that RFP is in, the project name, the relevant document information, and then the story of the RFP. So for example, this RFP was approved for publishing. It opened on October 2nd, and now we're awaiting the award recommendation. We also have this information on a big interactive display in our office. So it's linked to the Tableau server. And so anybody walking by, one of the analysts or buyers in our office or upper management, can come by and click on any of those bars, and it can bring you to the story of what's going on with that specific RFP. Okay, next slide. So here's a dashboard on our cycle time. So this displays all of the projects we have going on at one time. So you can filter this information many different ways. What's displayed is the type or kind of the team that it falls within, whether it's complex service or a professional contract. Again, you'll see your agency, the analyst or buyer that it's assigned to, project name, the type, whether it's an amendment, contract. Then we have whether it was submitted to us for an early review. And then over on the right, you'll see whether it's assigned to an analyst, returned to the agency, if it's with a supervisor, manager, or assistant director. Those numbers below it display how many weeks it's been in the process from start to finish. And this is the full life cycle. And then if you would hover over one of these numbers, it gives you more of a story on that particular item as well. So this one, it says the amendment is for DOA Office of Technology Service. The project is electronic licensing for hunt and fish. And it's currently at an assigned to analyst status and has been with the office for 10 weeks. So here down at the bottom, you can see the different things that you can click on to filter that information. Okay, next slide. All right, now I'm going to talk about proposal analysis and give a little example that we've done recently. So on this is where we typically compare bid prices to actual spend. So, and basically on prior year spend, what kind of savings or price increases can we expect? So the example I'm going to use is with chemical spraying. A previous bid we had was $1,500 a day for the crew rate plus a $29 gallon charge. Our new bid is $850 a day plus a $40 per gallon charge. So we pulled out last year's spend information on that contract to see where most of our money was going, and it looked like everything was going into our mix number 1, which is shown in this little chart up at the top. It's a little snippet of our pivot table that we were doing on there. So mix 1 is really where we focused, and that's where these $29 and $40 a gallon came from. So we realized that with the current new bid, if we would use that pricing, we probably would have spent about $60,000 more last year. So we went and did a little analysis and figured out that, hey, if we just drop that gallon rate by $2 and make it $38 a gallon, it would have saved us about $60,000 a year. So doing a little check-in like this can really give your buyer a great starting point to start their negotiations. Okay, next slide. All right, and our vendor usage. So we collect vendor usage quarterly from our vendors. We do supply kind of a standardized template that I'll go over on the next slide. It makes it pretty easy for mom and pop shops to submit their information. Even some of the larger companies use it. It's just easier for them to copy and paste the information into it. And what we do with this is we usually use VLOOKUPs just to pull in item numbers and things like that and just match pricing. So it's a quick kind of sampling and pricing verification on what they're charging our using agencies. If we find anything, we report that back to the buyer, and the buyer reports back to the vendor. All these usage amounts that we gather are entered into our ERP system, along with our administrative fees. So this also lets us know if we're collecting the correct administrative fees by looking at these usage reports. So we can, once you receive everything, we enter both the administrative fee and the usage into our ERP system. And we run reports on our contracts to determine which vendors haven't paid the administrative fee or submitted their usage to the buyer, and do some verification checks in there as well. Okay, next slide. So here's our template. You can see it's pretty simple. It's just some basic contract information at the top. We collect the customer's name, which would be the buying agency, invoice or PO number, the dates, the item number, the product description, item category. But here I'm going to focus on the item number. This is going to be the main thing that we try to get correct from our vendors. So we want this to match whatever they put in their bid, which matches the contract line in our ERP system. That way, when we go and do our VLOOKUPs, everything's pretty standard and we can do that quickly. Okay, next slide. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do with our spend research. And Jonathan mentioned this before. Basically looking to see what people are buying, doing some strategic sourcing and commodity research. So are agencies buying items that are not on a statewide contract? Or are agencies buying items that are on a statewide contract, but from a different vendor? Here's a pie chart. Note how Jonathan feels about those. So here you can see in the green, this is our statewide contract holder. So we're happy that most agencies are buying from our statewide contract holder. And the dark blue is actually another statewide contract. This is going to be for paper. But the rest of it is stuff we would dig down in to see why agencies are going elsewhere. Is it maybe because the agencies needed something right away, so they had to go to the closest supply store? Because our statewide contract holder Staples, we don't really have any Staples stores here in Louisiana. Okay, next slide. So wrap up for us. What does our data help us do? So it helps determine areas to focus negotiations. It helps tell us if there's a need for a new statewide contract. It helps to see if there are statewide contracts that are not being used and are no longer needed. And one big thing that we always check for, because we're still growing our data program, is do we have bad data? Are there reportable fields that we can require? Again, I know this was mentioned before, but making drop downs, making yes or no check boxes, things that are going to be easy to enter and that don't require a lot of cleanup. And is there anything else that we're missing that can make a difference? And just remember that consistency is crucial to having good data. All right, I think that's it for me. Here's my contact information. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions to see what we're doing in Louisiana or just to learn more. Next, Jonathan Gasson from Massachusetts will take over.
All right, thank you, Garrett. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Gasson. I'm a data analyst here at the Operational Services Division in Massachusetts. And here in Massachusetts, the OSD, we are responsible for, among other things, management oversight of procurement of goods and services, including direct management of more than 100 statewide contracts. So next slide. Okay, so today I'm going to speak a little about our data analytics program here at OSD. First up, I always want to say a quick, thank you to Garrett and Shane. A lot of interesting things you guys are doing in Virginia and Louisiana. I got a ton of new ideas. I might have to follow up with you guys about some of that cool stuff you guys are doing. So that was really great. And so anyway, moving on. Today, I'm going to speak a little about our program here, what we're trying to do, how we're attempting to assist sourcing professionals in their work and some of the obstacles that we've faced and the steps that we've taken to improve and where we're heading now with our data analytics program. Okay, next slide, John. Okay, so over the last few years here at OSD, we've been focused on advancing data-oriented solutions to answer key questions that our strategic sourcing staff need to know to effectively manage our statewide contracts. So we've committed to becoming a more data literate agency. That includes pushing our staff to think critically about how data is presented to them, as well as implementing new data collection tools, such as our sales reporting application that we recently introduced in the FY19, so 2018 we brought that in, and a new data and analytics visualization tool, Click, that we have implemented in the last year. So when we talk about data analytics at OSD, what are the kind of questions that we're trying to answer? I mean, at a high level, we want to know how widespread the use of our statewide contracts are, whether that's by executive offices, municipalities, nonprofits, or any other entity that is eligible to use them. We want to know how much, and for what prices those entities are using our contracts. We also want to know the reverse, or who isn't using our contracts, and could they be, and identifying those opportunities. We also want to measure the compliance of vendors who are on statewide contracts. We want to ensure they're doing the things that they are required to do, from meeting their reporting requirements, including paying their administrative fee, to ensuring that they are selling off-contract items, for example. And lastly, on this list, we want to measure the efficiency of our statewide special programs that we're required to run here, such as promoting environmentally preferred products. And we want to ensure that the time and effort that we put into making those programs successful are effective in measuring the efficiency of those programs. So this is not all-inclusive list, it's just a high-level sampling of these things. There's many more questions that we can ask of the data that we are collecting. And in the data analytics department here, we're always encouraging folks to identify questions or areas of interest that we could explore. There are many questions that we have been unable to answer so far that we hope to address pretty soon. And I think both in Virginia and Louisiana, they talked about cycle time analysis, and that's something that we're super interested in, as well as identifying or quantifying how much time and resources it takes to keep a vendor on a contract, for example. So that's a sampling of the areas of interest that we're trying to address with our data. I wanted to talk a little bit about where we get our data from and talk about those data systems. So as you can see from this picture, there are a number of sources that we rely on to collect our data for us, and they don't fit neatly together at all. A lot of the work that we're doing at OSD is that data modeling that Jonathan talked about at the beginning, is trying to get all these things to fit together to be able to analyze them. So this chart shows how our sources are managed, and that's another key thing that is kind of not a roadblock, I would say, but an obstacle for us. Is we have some applications that we purchase as software as a solution, like our Combis, which is our instance of BuySpeed. It's run by a third party, and you don't always have direct access to the data that comes out of that. I mean, we also have systems that we rely on that are run and operated by other state agencies. Most important one being the Commonwealth Information Warehouse, which is maintained by the State Controller's Office, so not us. So the top two boxes here, they contain the three main data sources that we rely on. Our e-procurement software Combis, like I said, it contains a lot of the purchasing information, purchase orders, bids, responses to bids. And the one of the downsides, however, is that not all of our buyers use Combis for various reasons. And we also have the Commonwealth Information Warehouse, which is the data source for our Commonwealth's financial system, MAS. And here we can track the actual dollars that are being spent, but without the detailed information of what is being purchased. And again, that's only for entities that use it. So municipalities, they have their own accounting systems, for example. We also have a new system in place to collect sales reports from our statewide contract vendors. The goal of that system was to fill in the gaps that are missing when we analyze data from Combis or the warehouse. So it's like the missing piece, folks who don't use either of those systems. So you have those three distinct data sources and disparate data sets. We need to use all three to get a full picture of what's going on in the state, and currently the bulk of our reporting makes use of one system at a time. They all store information in different ways, and by design, I mean, a contract in Combis will be differently represented from a contract in our sales reporting VRM system. It's not one-to-one, apples-to-apples comparison, and that's just the way that these things are set up. I mean, in Combis, a contract is set up so that folks can buy from it, whereas the contract is set up in VRM so that the vendors can report to it. So there's no perfect way to bring that data together from all three. And we also have a multitude of other data sources that range from in-house managed applications to spreadsheets and databases that staff are updating daily, including things that we hope end up being temporary, like tracking purchases of PPE for COVID-related reasons. And finally, on this point, I wanted to make that there's that applications box in the bottom there. And this is there because we have data from places that are not necessarily about purchasing or procurement, but about how we run our projects and conduct our day-to-day business. So with test rails for testing software and Jira is for managing and Scrum projects. And sometimes analyzing that data that we get from those systems can help us to recommend process improvements. Okay, so next slide, please, Jonathan. So that's what we have to work with. So what are we working on now? Well, our first steps have been to standardize our inputs. And Jonathan alluded to it earlier in the presentation, about 80% of the work is in the preparation, and that's definitely been true at OSD. And while we've made strides in how we collect and display our data using analytics and visualization tools, we still spend a great deal of time working on how to connect all these data sources together. So we took a big step with the implementation of our sales reporting system, moving from spreadsheets and access databases to a more formalized process for collecting that data from our vendors. As I said earlier, that VRM sales report data is very important for filling in the blanks with information that we cannot get from elsewhere. When we completed that project, we were now able to standardize the naming conventions for our vendor reported sales. And we talked about that earlier. I think all of the presenters so far have talked about that, of folks who can put in whatever they want in terms of a vendor name or any other kind of data point, free text things. That's always a huge challenge of trying to standardize that information so that we can get it into a usable format and start doing some analytics with it. So, so that was a huge issue with the old way that we collected those sales reports. And we would allow vendors to report whatever they wanted. So the new system allows us to translate those purchasing entity names as they arrive. So the system does it for us. It standardized those naming conventions for us. And this removed that largest obstacle from our prior data. And that was a result of data analysis. We looked at the old VRM data and we said, we're trying to analyze this data and the purchasing entity names are just, unusable. So we need to do something about that to get it into a better place. And that's where we spent the time and the effort to get the new system. So now we know who's buying stuff. And so a brief example I want to share about connecting our data sources. We have many entities that use Combis to conduct their purchases. That's our e-procurement. And that's definitely a focus for us here to get more folks to use it. So by comparing our Combi sales with the reported sales by the vendors that we can do now because of the new system, we can highlight the discrepancies and provide leads to outreach to. We can send our local government enablement team out to municipalities that are using statewide contract but not Combis and explain the benefits of using the system and try to get them to take advantage of that. So having said all that, what we have undoubtedly improved is how we display data to our business users. And our new analytics tool, Click, has been instrumental in that, allowing us to produce informative, interactive visualizations quickly. We use an iterative approach to creating these analytics dashboards. And once we put something together, using it as a tool to promote discussion and elicit more questions from our business users that we can implement. We're also trying to ask the most important question, which to me in data analytics, which is now you know what the data says, what are you going to do about it? For example, it's great to see that vendors' reports come in 45 to 48 days after the quarter ends, but is that something we need to address? Should we be attempting to move that figure lower, higher? If so, what policies could be used to implement to achieve that? Okay, that's the next slide. So I don't have a fancy video to show you the benefits of Click, but I just got a static picture here, but it's kind of the same deal. You can kind of go into Click and you can, it's very interactive. You can poke around and press buttons and add filters and things like that. So this example here is a picture of a dashboard that we are currently working on as an example of the kind of things you're able to produce using Click. This dashboard we're going to use for measuring our environmentally preferred product spend reported in VRM sales reports. And from it, we can see the current quarter spend. We can see how that compares to previous quarters. We can see how it breaks down amongst purchasing entity types. We can filter on those different areas, and we can provide this to our business users and have them interact with it in the ways that they feel is important and narrow it down and filter it that way. So we can also use it to identify the information that's needed to calculate additional EPP benefits. So for that program, we used to get a lot of our VRM or other data and put it into external calculators to really calculate the total benefits of using the environmentally preferred products. So that used to be an extremely time-consuming process to produce and process that information. But using Click, we can write load scripts to load and transform that data into a usable format very quickly and easily. And like I say, this is just an informational example. We're doing a lot of exciting things with Click that we can't display everything here today. But as I said earlier, what we want to promote with these kind of dashboards is the so what. What actions are we going to take based on this information? And that's when we present these things to our business users, we're always asking those questions. Okay, now you know, what are you going to do? Okay, next slide. So how does that benefit the procurement process? So using these improved data collection methods and analysis tools, we're able to provide multitude benefits to our sourcing professionals. We can use it to identify gaps in our process, what processes need to be tightened up or could be strengthened, attempt to measure the effect of those improvements. We can use it to measure the success of any potential projects that come up, policy and process decisions that are made, and making those decisions by starting with the data. For example, we're currently looking at implementing a contract management application. One of the reasons why we want to do that is to increase transparency in the agency about how the contract lifecycle. So we have to ask initially, how do we measure that? It could be measuring how many emails sourcing managers get, or from other departments asking questions about the process, or how many calls the help desk takes from vendors. Knowing what we want to measure is very important for figuring out how successful something is after the fact. It's like identifying measurements of success early on. We also assist our sourcing managers in measuring the performance of statewide contracts. When a contract is expiring, we provide a statewide contract 360 report, we call it, to a contract manager. This report is a collection of information regarding the contract from all of our data sources. So all of those things that are on that earlier slide, we put all that in one place. It's not all linked together. That's the part that we're working on now to automate that. And the sourcing managers use these to make decisions about renewing, rebidding, or retiring contracts. So that's really the bulk of the work that we're doing with that 360 report, is to put everything together so that our sourcing professionals have all of the key information and all the key performance indicators that they need that drive their decision making, and asking ourselves as in data analytics, how do we get that information to them as efficiently and quickly as possible? Okay, the last slide, John. Okay, so to wrap this up, a couple of points I wanted to make, almost lessons learned about our data analytics program. We're constantly using our data to prescribe process improvements for our business units. And what we learned is that any improvements made to the systems or process should account for the data questions too. What I mean by that is to include your data analytics department in as a stakeholder, and when you're looking at implementing new systems. And one of the things that we would like to do with our VRM data, for example, is like heat maps of identifying where spend occurs in the state of Massachusetts. But if we don't ask for a delivery zip code or a delivery address or anything like that, we can't, it's a lot harder to produce those maps. So knowing that upfront and knowing those things before you implement those systems is it causes a lot, can save a lot of headaches later on. And also, we're also constantly discovering issues with our data, whether it's missing data or inconsistent data, always looking for ways to improve it. And for example, we've seen with our VRM data, improving the way it's collected has highlighted more problems with the data. While vendors are better at reporting entity names, they're still not great at reporting product descriptions. And I also note that it's important not to wait for the data to be perfect for that. And at that point, you can always analyze what you have and use it to recommend improvements. And that's kind of how we ended up with that VRM sales reporting system in the first place, is identifying that the data was not in a place where we could use it, and then taking steps to improve that collection. And finally, understanding the context of your data is extremely important. In our VRM sales reporting system, we can see when reports are submitted. And it was noted that report submissions fell off dramatically after 60 days, and that we should look into that, the 60 days after the quarter. But understanding the context of why no one submits after 60 days is so important. There's specific business rules that prevent vendors from doing that. Now, if we'd known that, and if you know that before you do the analysis, you can save yourself some time. So what I'll say is always include the folks who, if you don't know the business rules around your data, including the folks who do know the business rules will also save you a lot of time and effort. That's my presentation. Thank you for listening. I'm happy to answer any questions as we wrap up here. But once again, thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. So yeah, one thing I want to close out with is you are going to receive a resources handout that has a whole bunch of links to a bunch of different things. And I'm going to walk through a couple of those just to give you a little bit of a heads up as to what they are. So I have included some links to business intelligence software. Now I will say this, NASPO doesn't really recommend or endorse a particular commercial product. So I have actually only included here ones that have some sort of free or open source version. So, we have Google Data Studio is totally free. There's not even a paid version. So if you'd like to pay for it, it's not even possible. It was really built by Google actually for Google Analytics data, so website data, but you can load lots of other data in there. I will offer the disclaimer that, obviously you want to be careful about your data security. So if you're going to be loading data into third-party tools, make sure that your technology team there is okay with it, and B, that it certainly wouldn't want to have anything that is personally identifiable or anything of that nature. Luckily, most procurement data that you're going to deal with, at least in terms of spend data, you shouldn't have to worry about that too much, and you can sort of sanitize it before you do that. But Microsoft Power BI, which we've mentioned, does have a free desktop version. Does limit your ability to share some things, but you can get started with some reports there. Tableau Public is free. If you're interested in transparency dashboards, I would definitely suggest this, because to the extent that you plan to publish it to the public anyway, you can take advantage of this tool for free. Superset is this is going to take a little bit of Python skills to get spun up, but it is a free data exploration and visualization tool, kind of point and click. It's actually an interesting story. This was actually built by Airbnb to do internal analytics, and then they just open sourced it. So you can get access to that. That's actually maintained by the Apache Foundation, so it has a pretty good user base. And then Plotly Dash is one that's built in Python. Lots of database software out there as well. Couple open source options here. No doubt that your technology team has a variety of relational databases that they use that are commercial, whether they're Microsoft or Oracle or other types, but these are both totally open source. You could, in fact, spin one up on your own laptop or desktop computer if you wanted to. So I have recommended a couple of those here. And I will say some of those power some very large commercial applications under the hood. So they are pretty advanced in terms of what they can do. I included some tips. I talked a little bit about Power Query for data modeling in Excel. I've included a link here to get started on that. And I also talked about fuzzy matching in Excel. That does require you to install an add-on, but I've included the link to that here. A couple of tips for effective data visualizations. There are entire books on this, so you can do as much reading as you want. But here's a couple quick tips that just have sort of a, bullet points of some things to think about, expanding upon what we talked about today. I did also want to provide you with some data sources. We talked briefly about, bringing in that outside data, some like underlying economic indicators, and seeing if that's related to some of the things that you're experiencing in your procurement office. The good thing about most of those is that that data is publicly available from the federal government. So Bureau of Economic Analysis publishes GDP, consumer spending, employment metrics. Those are published on a very regular basis. You can download the raw data at any time. The Federal Reserve has a lot of economic data. They have some tools out there where you can download that as well. And of course, the Census Bureau, I think all of us know that they track population and demographics and things like that, but they also they do a survey of government finances as well. So if you're interested in downloading that information, that is out there. I've included some further reading, a few blogs and things that I find interesting that have various articles and sometimes tutorials on how to do a very specific thing. So if you're looking to do a very specific type of analysis in R or Python or Excel, you can often find examples of that on sites like these. And I would encourage you to use Google as your friend to find some other ones as well. And then the last piece of this is we talked quite a bit about R. Python is a really good language as well. You will find that if you're hiring for a skill set of a data analyst, particularly people who have come out of like business analytics programs or decision analytics programs like Shane talked about, they're going to have this kind of stuff on their resume, right? You're at NASPO, we are hiring a data analyst right now, and this is the kind of skills that we are seeing on students coming out of those programs. So this is definitely a skill set that's out there, in the marketplace. I included some suggested libraries. Anna's video is really great. She talked about how there's all these different things that people have already built to like short circuit the process. You don't have to write a whole bunch of code from scratch to do some of these. In particular, I would draw your attention to on R, Shiny is actually a tool you can build to build like really polished, wonderful user interactive dashboards. If you go to their website, you'll actually see they have a gallery, so you can sort of browse and see what's possible with that, and some of these other tools do as well. And then the last thing I would say, if you're really interested in machine learning, there are two open source frameworks that are very popular. Some of these power things as complicated as like self-driving vehicles. So in terms of like, object detection in videos. So very, very powerful in terms of the machine learning space. TensorFlow and PyTorch are both totally open source. Obviously a little bit of a learning curve if you're not familiar with it, but there's definitely some good applications there. If you're interested in learning more about some practical applications, I'm very interested in exploring data cleaning techniques using machine learning, particularly for NASPO Value Point, where we have data sets on the order of millions of rows per quarter that are coming in that we just don't have the resources to code by hand even if we wanted to, right? So it is a problem that really requires that type of machine learning. So if you're interested in exploring that, I am certainly interested in talking to you about it. So I don't know, Lori, do we have any questions? I know we have like maybe 1 minute left.
Yeah, we had a couple questions come in. So I'll just say this, since we are at the full amount of our time, feel free to hop off if you got to go. We will go through these questions. So if you guys would like to hear the answers to those, more than welcome to stick around. But the main things I wanted everyone to take away at the very end is, one, make sure that you take that survey link. We've dropped it a couple times in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and drop it again right there. And the very last question of it, you're going to need to make sure that you type in your email address if you are looking for your UPPCC contact hours, which you will get 1.5 for attending today's webinar. Also, you're going to want to make sure that you register for our next NASPO webinar. Don't want to miss that, right? That's our student perspective webinar that's coming up on November 20th hosted by our Academic Affairs Department. I just got the registration link for that in the chat. Now, I'm going to transition back to questions, guys, okay? So first up, and Garrett, it looks like you answered this one in the question and answer, but I thought you might want to answer it for everybody here. And the question was, is your RFP cycle time dashboard counting from the time the agency enters the draft RFP into the system or upon arrival to the Office of State Procurement?
So on our dashboard, we start when it gets submitted to the Office of State Procurement. And the reason for that is our key performance indicators are built off of those dashboards as well. So once it gets submitted to us, that starts the time when it's in our hands. The agency can spend as much time working on it as they need, but what really matters on our key performance indicators is the time that it's with us.
Oh, Lori, looks like you're muted, Lori.
That's never been a problem in my life, guys, ever. And this is a question from everybody. It's coming from Miss Sandra, and it looks, I'll just call on everybody like down the row here. And that is, do you provide specific data to agencies upon request? Or is all of your analytics efforts directed to your own central procurement office staff only? So Garrett, I'll ask you that first.
So a little of both, actually. We have the stuff that's put out there publicly on our Louisiana checkbook as far as reporting and things like that. But as far as the tools that we use, like Tableau and stuff like that, that's kind of internal at this point. We haven't gotten very far with it yet, but eventually we will probably have some public-facing Tableau dashboards and stuff like that too.
Okay, Jonathan Gasson, same question to you, sir.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the same answer. It's a little column A, a little column B. Most of the stuff that we do is office for us mainly. We do provide some information to other things, but we don't really have any like public-facing dashboards or anything like that yet. Not really. Mostly for our internal use.
Is that something that you guys? I was gonna say, is that something that you guys have on the horizon for the immediate, or is that something that's being tossed around?
It's something that's been discussed. So, I mean, like, when we talk about those data sources, one of the big ones, the Commonwealth Information Warehouse, the state's financial system, that already has its own public-facing application. They call it see-through. You can get from the comptroller's website. So it's like our stuff is more of a mixture of a bunch of different things that we're really trying to get that to a place where we can kind of make meaningful. While we have discussed it, I don't think there is any real plans in the near future to kind of do anything public yet. That's the question.
Thank you. So your same question to you, Jonathan Hollinger. I'm glad I asked both Jonathans back to back because that's not nearly confusing.
Yeah, so, obviously we're in a little bit of a different situation at NASPO Value Point in that we are not a central procurement office. We're a cooperative contracting organization, but we do we do both, right? So we have our own intelligence that we gain from dashboards and reports. Some of those are automated and update like every night, and we can keep track of participating addendum and like sort of summary level spend. We do also do sort of ad hoc analysis, particularly on our detailed spend data. That is a data set that typically requires more cleaning, so it's a little bit harder for us to automate the dashboards from those. So we do provide that information to our sourcing teams as they go through that process, and we are in the process of building that into a more rigorous analysis of making decisions on portfolios, whether we decide to do them, whether we decide to sunset them. That is a big piece of the puzzle, is the analysis. We also have some market research and things in there as well.
Thank you for that. And Mr. Shane, same question to you, sir.
Yeah, and I actually had gotten in the Q&A and typed an answer as well. So we absolutely, provide that data out to our entities and our government users for analysis. If you have an EVA ID, and we have about 11,000 users on the government side that have EVA IDs. They have access to our business intelligence tool to run reports that we've built for them. We call them canned reports, to meet their needs for whatever type of analysis they need to do. There's also an ad hoc reporting tool that they have access to, so they can kind of, if they have the skill set, they can build their own reports and then and excuse me, that's my dog barking. Yeah, there's the COVID. I'm surprised we haven't had that yet today. The old working from home. And then we also make things publicly available, tons of charts and graphs and reports for the general public and our vendor community as well.
Well, Shane, you know what the rule is? If your animal barks on camera, it means you have to show us the critter. Those are the rules. And is that a little Frenchy? Oh my goodness. Precious. Okay. And it looks like I've got one last question, and I believe this is for Mr. Jackson. And that is, when checking compliance of vendors on statewide contracts, what exactly are you looking for? Are you looking for correct fees, correct pricing, correct items being sold? Can you give us some ideas? And if I picked the wrong Jonathan, someone correct me.
I can answer it. So, I know I talked about how we check for compliance of our vendors. And mainly what we're checking for when we talk about compliance now is that they're meeting their reporting requirements. They have to pay vendors have to pay their admin fee of 1%, and they have to do their sales reporting each quarter. And there's various other things that they need to do to be considered compliant. So that's kind of what we're checking for on a quarterly basis. We want to be able to do a vendor report card. That's like a next thing that we're kind of working towards. And one thing that we've realized by collecting all this sales report data is that we would love to be able to check that vendors are selling the right things for the right price that's been agreed to and all that kind of stuff. But that stuff is more of a manual review right now. But we would love to be able to do that in a more systematic way. I think next order is to fix some of those inputs too. So standardize even more standardization of our inputs to be able to check that information and review that kind of compliance as well. So that's like a next level kind of review. But yeah, it's mostly reporting requirements that we're checking for right now.
Sounds like you're talking about listening to that feedback loop that we were talking about earlier and listening to it, right? And that kind of creates its own continuous improvement process, right? It allows you to identify those gaps.
Right. We're never going to be done with standardizing our inputs, I guess is my point.
All right, everyone. I would like to thank all of our panelists today for being absolutely wonderful and providing so much great information, especially a big shout out to Mr. Jonathan Hollinger for making that wonderful handout that every person that registered for this webinar is going to be sent out. A copy of the handout that Jonathan went over, a copy of the slide deck. We're also going to give you a link to today's recording of the webinar. So make sure to check your inboxes in about 24 hours. As a reminder, if you want that UPPCC certificate for your contact hours, make sure that you take that survey link. It's going to be included in the PowerPoint also. And I have a couple of other things I want to go over real quick, guys. I'm going to do a quick poll. I know we're 8 minutes over, but at this point, just lean into it, right? Quick poll. I want to know, what would you guys like to see more of on more research or training on provided next? Do you want to know more about data cleaning? Do you want to know more about selecting KPIs? Do you want to know more about data analytics program management? What do you guys want to know about? Give everyone about, we'll say about 20 more seconds. Come on, we're almost at 100%, guys. Come on. All of the above. That's right, Faytan. That's the right answer. All right, it looks like winning out was data analytics program management with 47%, and selecting KPIs following close behind, and data cleaning was also close behind it. So all of the above, I guess, Faye, was the correct answer. So thank you, everybody. Also, Jonathan, if you'll go to the next slide for me. Guys, also attached in your PowerPoint, we have put in there all of our NASPO resources about data analytics. So in these slides, these are hot links that are going to take you straight to those resources, right? All of our blog posts, our content that we have that's provided, different webinars we've done in the past, including Jonathan Gasson's own Cronin. His 2019 finalist Cronin presentation is linked on here. So make sure that you check out every slide in this PowerPoint when it's sent to you. All right, once again, I want to thank everyone. I would like to thank my coworker, Omar Salinas Jacone, for being awesome today and for helping everyone through this. And once again, thank our panelists. Thank you all, and let's have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.